Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and it's week 15. These are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for the fantasy playoff wildcard round. Hopefully you have the playoff bye, but most of us, it's a win or go home scenario. So we're going to start at quarterback, and I'm going to bring up the matchups at the position. That's what this chart here represents. The last 5 games, every defense, how many points per game they allow to the quarterback position on average. And last week, the high end of this chart was actually closer to like 25, 26 points. So over the last week, it has really flattened out, and there aren't that many like huge upgrades. Obviously, we're chasing over 20 points allowed. That's definitely a good spot to be in, but less than 15, obviously it's not good, but I don't think it's like that much different in terms of matchups. So I think we're kind of trusting who we have in this spot, and especially when I read off the players who get advantageous matchups, I doubt you're changing who's in your lineup. The best matchup is the Falcons, who go up against Las Vegas this week. So Desmond Ridder is expected to be the starter, but there's actually a chance that Aiden O'Connell might practice on Saturday and be available on Monday. He's actually not going on IR. So that is a wash. But then number 2 matchup would be Dallas going up against Bryce Young, who's actually been a top 20 quarterback the last month, but still not a player you're really trusting. But the next best matchup is for Kirk Cousins against Las Vegas, and I could honestly see Michael Penix play in the second half. So Cousins has been terrible, no touchdowns the last month for him. I wouldn't trust Kirk Cousins. And then the Rams have been a good matchup, but it's pretty skewed by the Bills game against Josh Allen, and Brock Purdy in the rain was terrible last night. So he did not get an upgrade, and I was wrong to endorse him top 10 yesterday. That was a bad call by me. But Will Levis gets a top 5 matchup as well. How much do you trust Will Levis against the Bengals? Their defense sucks. I doubt they can stop him, but if anyone can, it would be Will Levis stopping himself. So too much turnover potential to trust, although I do consider this game an upset alert. I could see it happening with the former coach going against his former team and a bad defense against him. Will Levis, I'm trusting in a playoff environment, unless it's a super flex league given this upgrade. But the Jets and Jaguars are also high-end matchups, an upgrade for Mac Jones and Aaron Rodgers going up against each other. How much do you trust them? I don't think I'm starting either of them. And then Kyler Murray does get a top 10 matchup here, but Kyler's been kind of bad lately. Not the safest play, closer to quarterback 20 than even quarterback 10. So Kyler technically gets an upgrade. How much do you trust that? Maybe the first player who actually deserves start consideration with an upgrade. But Washington, also an upgrade lately, going against Jake Haener, because Derek Carr not going to suit up. They are not looking to Rattler. They did declare Haener the starter. And then lastly, the 10th best matchup this week is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it looks like Justin Herbert will suit up. He's been ruled active. He's dealing with a ankle injury, I believe, but full in practice today, and Ladd McConkey was upgraded to questionable. If Ladd plays, then you feel a little more confident in the floor with Herbert. So maybe a safer play, but everyone that gets an upgrade in general is hard to trust in your lineup. The players that get a downgrade are where most of the starts actually are. However, the worst matchup against Arizona, which looks like the outlier on this chart, is for Drake May, who's coming off a bye and maybe plays a lot better. Usually rookies do make progress after the bye week. A chance he plays a lot better than 12 points. But on paper, it's a big downgrade for Drake May. Next worst matchup would be for Russell Wilson, who gets the Eagles. And with no George Pickens, you really have to rely on Freiermuth. And I don't know if I trust Russell Wilson this week in that scenario. But Buffalo and Detroit are downgrades on paper, but this is probably the game of the week. I doubt you're actually benching Josh Allen and Jared Goff. Definitely not Josh Allen. Maybe you actually have a better option than Goff, but he's been a top 10 quarterback this season. I'd probably trust him and just start him. Pittsburgh also downgrade for Jalen Hurts. This one I'm a bit worried about because Hurts has been trending down, not throwing the ball anywhere near as much. And if A.J. Brown has a Deebo Samuel type of game as they try to force feed him, maybe the Steelers force a lot of turnovers and Hurts is a liability. So this one's tricky, but you're probably still starting Jalen Hurts. The Vikings are a downgrade. Caleb Williams did torch them a couple weeks ago in fantasy, but this game is on the road, not at home, and it could be a much different story. Caleb Williams in that environment, the home field advantage for Minnesota is insane. So I worry about that for Caleb. And then the next downgrade would be for Jayden Daniels in the Superdome against the Saints. Off the bye, though, I would be trusting Jayden Daniels. Same goes for Lamar, a downgrade on paper, but no one's benching Lamar against the Giants. These last two downgrades are hovering right around 15 points per game allowed, and I don't think that's a huge downgrade. If anything, it's more like league average in terms of what to expect. So these two players are going against each other. The Houston and Miami game is technically tough for both quarterbacks. Tua has been on a heater. I would still probably trust Tua, and then Stroud has been dog shit. Maybe the bye does help him bounce back. So those are all of the matchup upgrades and downgrades. But in general, I think this chart might be a bit more compelling and important for deciding who you're trusting. These are the points per game for every quarterback, at least the ones that are going to be starting this week. And the blue dots are the average the last 4 games. But this is organized in terms of highest to lowest on the season. The red dots represent the 2024 per game average for every quarterback. So we'll look at each player individually, mention the discrepancy based on how they've done all year compared to just the last 4 games. To kick off the list, we have Lamar Jackson at number 1. And yes, I am recording this after the fact. That's why the lighting changed. When I was shuffling to prepare this chart, Lamar did get cut off, and he is the quarterback 1 on the season, reliably offering 24 points per game. That's more on average this year than Josh Allen. So you're not benching Lamar. That should be obvious. But he did get cut off, and I am adding it in after the fact while editing. So I'm going to get back to the original recording, and Lamar will be removed from this chart, but understand he is number 1 on the year at quarterback. Number 1 after last week, Josh Allen is the QB1. Huge game. You're definitely not benching Josh Allen. Next on the list would be Joe Burrow, who's also been on a bit of a heater lately. Don't think you're benching Joe Burrow, a top 2 quarterback. The number 3 quarterback would be Jalen Hurts, who's actually been not playing as well lately, down almost 3 points per game over the last 4 as the offense has pivoted towards Saquon Barkley. Jalen Hurts has diminished numbers in fantasy. That's a big reason why A.J. Brown is not happy right now. Hurts is not throwing the ball, and Hurts is actually only averaging 157 passing yards per game, and while he doesn't have a single turnover, 7 total touchdowns isn't like the most elite number for him. So I'm a bit worried about the ceiling for Hurts, especially against the Steelers. He is trending down. You're probably still starting him, but I don't think he's an elite option this week. He's more of a low-end QB1, in my opinion, but you're still most likely going to start him. The next quarterback, though, has really been in a slump over the last month. Baker Mayfield probably got you to the playoffs. He was so dominant at the beginning of the season, but since Mike Evans and Chris Godwin went down, he's just not quite the same player. And as Cade Otton has quickly faded the last couple weeks, they have pivoted towards a run-first offense with Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. Both of them catch passes, but Bucky Irving's not totally healthy, and I could see some interceptions and turnovers for Baker against the Chargers. That's not an easy defense to go up against. So while Baker's been so good this season, I have downgraded him in certain spots and been right about it. Last week I told you to start him. It was the right call, but on the road against the Chargers, how much do you trust him? He has the same amount of passing touchdowns as turnovers the last 4 games. That's a total of 5. So 14.7 points would suck on Sunday. I don't know if Baker is actually a top 10 play this week. But next player on the list has been pretty much equal all season. Jayden Daniels comes in here with an average of 19.7 on the season. Last month, 19 points. We know he had a slump after that rib injury, and it appears that he's healthy. The last few games we've seen him, he's been running at a much higher rate. Off the bye with plenty of rest, I think Jayden Daniels will be exceeding these averages. I think Jayden Daniels will be going up this week on this chart. So definitely a must start with his rushing appeal. I'm not going to bench him. And then this next player, this one's tricky, but it's Jameis Winston. How much do you trust Jameis Winston against the Chiefs? We know he has that massive upside. He torched the Broncos, and we consider that a good defense, but one of their top corners was banged up beyond Surtain. That depth was tested by Jerry Jeudy. So Winston is capable of putting up an elite performance. He has been a top 10 quarterback this season when he plays, but last week he was kind of bad. Not the best performance for him against the Steelers last week. The Chiefs may not be the same difficulty, but these next two have been really on heaters lately. Sam Darnold, after last week's game, not a surprise, coming in at 24.7 points the last month. On average this season, 18.6, would still be a top 10 quarterback. So I would trust Darnold this week, definitely going to start him. And then same goes for Tua. Just like Darnold, he's also really playing well the last month. And I think if you take out that Buffalo game where he threw 3 interceptions and had a concussion in the third quarter, these numbers on average this year would probably be really close to 20 plus points, if not higher. That one game really does diminish Tua's season overall. So Tua is actually a very good start. I would be starting Tua this week. I don't care too much about the bottom 10 matchup against Houston. But this next player is Brock Purdy, and I wish I told you to bench him. I did not. I thought that Rams matchup would not be the same. I did not look at the weather forecast, and I apologize about that. But Debo dropped the touchdown. That probably would have happened. Debo was tough there. But Purdy did not look good in the rain. That contract decision is interesting. But next on this list, has been playing better lately, would be Bo Nix. And he did start off kind of rough as a rookie. This isn't a surprise. He has been rising, but kind of falling back down a little bit after that peak around week 10 or so. He was like a top 6 quarterback around then. But right behind him would be Russell Wilson, who I do not trust with no George Pickens. Fading a little bit. Last week was emblematic of that. And against the Eagles, I think it's too tough of a test. I'd be benching Russell Wilson for sure this week. But next on the list, averaging kind of the same the last month as the season, would be Kyler Murray at 17 points. And right behind him is Jordan Love. They're both kind of mediocre. We thought they'd be clear top 10 options this season, and they're just outside of it. They're not like atrocious, but they're not like super safe every week. And these offenses, I think, have been pivoting more towards run first with the running back, especially in the red zone. Like Jacobs is capping the ceiling for Jordan Love. And same applies with James Conner, and even like Trey Benson and Amari DiMercado do get involved as well. So they're pretty average quarterbacks. I don't know if you like have to start those guys, kind of matchup dependent. But then Mahomes has been playing a lot better lately. He started off the season kind of rough. He ranks behind them, but lately an average of 18.8 points is not bad. That would rank as the quarterback 13. And then behind him, Jared Goff, also on a bit of a heater lately, played really well last week. With Goff, it's really a question of whether or not the touchdowns go to the running backs or not. If he throws the touchdowns, then Goff is great. If he hands them off, then Goff is more average. But I think he is a safe player. Definitely the last month he has been putting up top 6 numbers at the position, followed by Drake May right behind him in a bit of a slump lately, but maybe the bye helps him out. And then also a player that's been in a slump lately, really diminished numbers, would be Geno Smith, down to 13.5 on average, 15.8 on the season. As the running backs get involved, I have some concerns with Geno Smith. Lockett's kind of irrelevant now. DK's in a slump. It's only JSN that you really trust, and whether or not that running back catches enough of those passes. So Geno's a bit risky. I'm worried about Geno on Sunday night. I think Charbonnet could be the showcase. But Caleb Williams is boom or bust. In the last month, he has 2 great games, and then last week was a pretty big dud. So Caleb is too volatile to really trust, but has been playing better with the offensive coordinator change. And then Justin Herbert has been very consistent all season, an average of about 15 points. Overall, there was a stretch about a month ago where he was top 10. So Herbert, as the receivers get banged up for him, not quite the same player. As J.K. Dobbins exited the offense, defenses have been playing more man. It has been more difficult for Herbert. But with McConkey getting healthy against the Bucks, maybe he's much better than this ranking, than this number would suggest. But right behind him is Derek Carr, who's not that much different. Derek Carr's not like an impressive fantasy player, so maybe Herbert is a bit overrated. But then Stafford was terrible to start the season with all the injuries at receiver, and lately he was on a heater, but no touchdowns on Thursday. I also told you to start Stafford, and that was not the best call. He wasn't as bad as Purdy, but still Stafford didn't do shit in the rain in the first half. Second half, no touchdowns for Stafford. And then Aaron Rodgers on the season, less than 15 points. I wouldn't trust Rodgers despite the upgrade of a matchup against the Jags. And then Anthony Richardson, he's had a weird season off the bye. I think he'll be a lot better, but we do see this ceiling kind of crop up here. He has been playing better since returning to the lineup with 17.9 points. He's been a bit more consistent. We know he has that massive ceiling. So he's an interesting player, a player that I think does deserve some consideration, at least off of the wire. Maybe you stash him on the bench rather than let your opponent start him against you. But then behind him would be CJ Stroud, who's been terrible this season. Stroud has been so bad. A lot of injuries at receiver, but the offensive line, I think, is the main issue. He's not playing well at all, and maybe the bye week helps, but I don't feel great about it. It could turn into a shootout, though, against the Dolphins. I think they might just rely more on Joe Mixon. Mixon being such a good player, I think, is the main reason why Stroud is not that good in fantasy. He's just not being asked to throw it that much. And then right behind him is Drew Lock. And Lock only has 2 games, but shockingly, Drew Lock has over 57 rushing yards in both games this season. 57 2 weeks ago, 59 last week. Lock does run it quite a bit. But then Kirk Cousins has been on a massive decline. No touchdowns, 8 turnovers for him the last 4 games, and that ranks dead last in that sample size. Kirk Cousins is just a poison pill in your lineup. There's no way I'm starting Cousins. Even against the Raiders, no fucking chance. But maybe there's some upside for Penix if he finally does get some snaps in Atlanta. And then these last players are in like a clear tier below, getting less than 12 points apiece. We have Will Levis. So how much do you really trust Levis in that big upgrade? Probably not that much, but has been playing a little bit better as of late. Cooper Rush, in the last 4 games, averaging 15 points. He started off terribly, filling in for Dak. But then Bryce Young actually has hit a bit of a groove, averaging 16.2 points the last month. On average over the season, only 11 points. So Bryce Young has really improved lately, and he actually ranks as the quarterback 18. Shockingly, Bryce Young is a top 20 play in Superflex. Don't forget about him. He actually has a good matchup this week. So an upgrade for Bryce Young. He's trending in the right direction, but still not like safe enough to start top 10. And then these last 2, there's no way you're starting. We have Aiden O'Connell and Mac Jones. No fucking chance with those 2. So that's it for the charts, and that should help you out making your decision a lot. But if you're still wondering who to start, these are my rankings at the quarterback position. I think with the start your studs mentality, the top 3 in the elite tier are very obvious. There's no fucking chance if you have Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, or Joe Burrow that you're benching any of them. Allen, I think, is the clear number 1. Lamar against the Giants, unless Derrick Henry steals every touchdown, Lamar's still going to be great. That's going to be a huge blowout. And then Joe Burrow against his former offensive coordinator, I still think he plays great. I worry about their defense, but Joe Burrow, not a player you're benching. If any of them let you down, like, that's on them. You're not going to fault yourself and be upset about the decision to start one of these players if they put up a dud. That's just how it goes. Just a rough roll of the dice. But I would trust these 3 with my life this week. This next tier, I think all of these options need to be in your lineup. Jayden Daniels at number 4 should torch the Saints off the bye. He's going to be very healthy. The rushing stats are so valuable, and his connection with Terry McLaurin is really good. And even Zack Ertz. Like, Zack Ertz is scoring touchdowns at a high rate right now. Jayden Daniels, a very safe play. Maybe Noah Brown or one of those other receivers like Luke McCaffrey can step up during the bye. You think their offense should be better. So Jayden Daniels, a big upgrade, definitely a top 5 option. At number 4, definitely start Jayden Daniels. I'm also going to start Sam Darnold off that heater. It's another home game. The Bears defense isn't like the best matchup you could ask for, but lately it's not a downgrade. It is league average. And with his weapons, there's no chance I'm benching Sam Darnold. Kevin O'Connell just dials up such a good game plan every week. And Darnold really capitalizes. Darnold's going to get a huge contract. I hope he stays in Minnesota. I would love for him to stay there because he's just not going to look the same on any other roster. It's just not equivalent to the Vikings anywhere else. So start Sam Darnold after last week. I think you have to. I also think you have to start Tua Tagovailoa. At the moment, he's just playing so well, going over 24 points per game and an average of 326 passing yards per game, 11 touchdowns, 0 turnovers. We thought that Matthew Stafford was impressive with 10 touchdowns, no picks, but Tua's playing even better, and Darnold in his last 4 games after 5 last week only has 11 touchdowns himself. I actually kind of trust Tua a bit more, but on paper, the Texans matchup is bottom 10, so I will put Tua below Darnold. There's always that chance Tua gets a concussion and doesn't finish the game. But I would start him at this point. I'd be rolling with Tua and that Dolphins offense. But Goff, I think, is also a player that's a must start. Obviously kind of a cap ceiling if all the touchdowns go to Gibbs and Montgomery. But Jared Goff against the Jaguars, I believe, was better than Kirk Cousins against the Tampa Bay Bucks. I think Goff has the second best fantasy game of any quarterback this season. So he can pop off, but in general, he's usually hovering between 16 and 20 points. This week, I think he will go over 20. Against Buffalo, they're going to need to score like crazy. And then this next tier starts off with two players that look pretty bad for me. But I did tell you to start Brock Purdy and Matthew Stafford with some confidence last night. If I looked at the weather forecast, maybe I would have changed my opinion. I apologize for not even mentioning the weather. I really didn't think it would matter in Santa Clara. I remember checking it back on Monday, and the rain in the first half really cratered the offense. But Purdy was really, really brutal. That sucked. I thought he would play a lot better than that. He did not. And same with Stafford. No touchdowns for him. He was better in the second half, but the rain really crippled their offense as well. So 2 bad calls. I wish I could have him back. I'm sure Jalen Hurts is going to put up more points than them. Damn, I wish I could change that. But I am honest. I am honest about my bad calls. I'm not going to retroactively diminish Jalen Hurts. But obviously, if I knew what Purdy and Stafford would put up, I would have ranked Hurts above. But against the Steelers, it's not an easy matchup at all. Don't pretend like you're not a little worried about it. Based on the recent history for Hurts, there have been very diminished stats. I know he had like 3 touchdowns last week total, but still, you wouldn't be surprised if the Steelers make this a very low-scoring game. Their defense is balls to the wall. They held the Ravens to under 20 points earlier this season. It could definitely happen again. Odds are you're still starting Jalen Hurts, but I did bump him down at number 10. I feel like he's a tier below where he normally should be. Like, you'd expect him to be top 5, but this week I wish I had Hurts at number 8, not number 10, but I am telling you to start him. I think he'll be fine, but not great. I don't think it's his best game by any stretch of the imagination. Number 11, I think in the same tier would be Patrick Mahomes, who's averaging 18.8 points. That's quarterback 13 on a per game basis. And right above him is Jalen Hurts, averaging 18.9 the last month. So they're both outside the top 10 the last month on average, and Hurts gets a much more difficult matchup. But Mahomes still kind of scares me. Mahomes is still like a potential turnover machine. Like, he has been cleaning it up a lot more lately, but I still don't feel great about his weapons, especially in December. We know that they're probably going to scale back Travis Kelce as they get closer to the playoff push. So I'm a bit concerned about that. I feel like there's a potential trap game here. Maybe against the Browns, Mahomes isn't great, but you drafted him super high. He has been playing better. I would still rank him as a start-worthy player. I do project over 18 points for Mahomes, and that's safe enough to trust. I would still start Mahomes if he was my guy. I wish I could rank him above Purdy and Stafford. But at number 12, I got Bo Nix versus the Colts, and Bo Nix is also averaging like over 19 points, so a safe top 12 quarterback lately. Against the Colts, though, I see a potential risk factor here. Without that long touchdown to Marvin Mims, he wasn't like the best quarterback against the Browns, and his rushing stats have completely evaporated over the last month. Bo Nix used to run the ball at a very high rate. There was a stretch where Bo Nix was averaging over 40 rushing yards like 6 weeks ago every week. But in the last month, that number is down to only 2 rushing yards per game. For some reason, that is just not something he does anymore. Maybe it's game plan specific. Maybe it's something that Sean Payton wants to remove from the game plan. If they don't need to risk Bo Nix running around, then why not? So that is why his numbers have been diminishing. He used to average like closer to 23 fantasy points per game, and now it's 19. So he still has a safe floor, but I do kind of worry about this matchup a little bit. I could see the Colts defense off the bye put up a very good game plan. I feel like they could be looking ahead as well. The Broncos have the Chargers on Thursday night, and that division game is a bit more important than this one, but it's still kind of a must-win. Their schedule the rest of the way is very difficult. They get the Chargers, the Bengals, and then the Chiefs to close it out. If the Broncos go 1-3, they could actually still miss the playoffs with only 9 wins. This is a very important game. I think Knicks will be fine, but at number 12, I don't feel compelled to rank him in the top 10. Obviously, if we remove Purdy and Stafford, though, he would rank at number 10. But at number 13, the last player in this tier, based on the track record from the beginning of the season, I still think you kind of feel compelled to roll with Baker Mayfield. But the matchup against the Chargers kind of scares me. There could be a lot of turnovers. However, with Bucky Irving banged up, I think Baker will be throwing it a bit more. Last week, Jalen McMillan did step up. It's a tough matchup for Cade Otton, though, and last week it was a great matchup for Cade Otton. So as long as Baker throws for multiple touchdowns, he's going to be fine. But I'm worried if it's only one and then Rashad and Bucky score all the other touchdowns on the ground, you could get burned. That's why I have him at the bottom of this tier. But I do project over 18 points. I think Baker will have a decent game. He played well last week, and I think he'll be maybe not as good, but somewhere closer to that. I think the Bucks will win this game, actually. I am going to it, but I feel like the Bucks will put up a good effort. I would trust Evans and McMillan to do enough for Baker. I think he throws 2 touchdowns. So I am telling you to start him at number 13. While he's on the bottom of the streaming conversation, I'm still projecting enough points for Baker to merit a spot in your lineup. However, this next tier has a decent amount of risk, but there's a lot of upside as well. Maybe you are willing to pull the trigger on these names. Like Jameis Winston could put up an enormous game. He's the quarterback 8 in the last month, averaging over 20 points per game and 331 yards per game. He has 8 touchdowns, 7 turnovers, and those turnovers are the problem. I anticipate at least 1 pick six against the Chiefs, but he could still throw for a ton of yards, be a great fantasy play this week. If you're desperate and you're just hoping for upside, I think Jameis Winston is the best pickup off the wire to plug in. I would trust him the most, and I'm going against him in the subscriber league. Odds are he goes off. And then at number 15, I also think Anthony Richardson is very tempting, very high ceiling. He's averaging 17.9 points per game in his last 4, with 7 total touchdowns, 3 of them on the ground, and also 47 rushing yards per game as well. So that's a very safe floor. You're getting almost 9 points per game from Richardson just on the ground. And while he's averaging less than 200 passing yards per game, the matchups average this week, and we saw Jameis throw for like 500 yards against them before that bye. They have an injury in the secondary, and perhaps it can be exploited. So Richardson, if he gets one of those deep shots, will probably go over 20 points. But even without it, I would expect like over 16. I think there's a safe floor with elite upside with Richardson, just like Jameis Winston. If you're searching on the waiver wire, I think shoot for the moon and go with a guy like Winston or Richardson in the top 15. I don't hate pivoting to them if you're desperate. But number 16, I got Kyler Murray versus New England, who's been like a safe floor play, but not like great this season. The matchup is top 10. It's one of the few upgrades, but I see a trap game looming. I have some concerns. Kyler's been a bit rough, not running it as much lately, and I'd rather pass. I'd rather just bench him at number 16. This is the midway point. There's 32 quarterbacks. I don't think in a 1 quarterback league I'd be starting Kyler Murray. But in the same conversation as Richardson and Winston, there is that 20-point ceiling. It is possible, but we haven't seen it for Kyler in a while. Number 17, I think the floor is very safe with Herbert, but with Ladd McConkey coming back, maybe the ceiling is open. The Bucks are a top 10 matchup. It is an upgrade on paper, but Herbert needs to run it, and given his injury concerns himself, I think they might diminish his designed runs this week. So Herbert, just a floor play, kind of bust proof for at least like 14, 15 points, but I'm not convinced he goes over 20. Against Tampa, I don't think it's a massive upgrade given the injuries on their roster. But number 18 is very interesting. It's CJ Stroud versus Miami, who at some point you think would finally pay off. He's been terrible this season, though, averaging like 13 points on the year. And off the bye, maybe they figure things out. But their offensive line is still so banged up. I don't feel good about it. And Bradley Chubb is expected to play this week for the Dolphins. I think that could be a problem. A good pass rush against Miami. So Stroud could be a huge liability. If he shits the bed again, you wouldn't be surprised, but you expect Nico Collins to play well. It's also a good matchup for Dalton Schultz. Stroud may finally turn things around, but he's been so ass this season, I wouldn't trust him. Just like Herbert and Kyler, I kind of don't feel like he's going to go over 16 points. I'd rather just avoid it, but there is potential. We did draft Stroud as a top 5 guy. He never lived up to that draft day capital. At number 19, there is some upside for Caleb Williams as well. We've seen some massive blow-up games. Caleb is a top 10 quarterback the last month, averaging over 20 points on average. But last week was terrible against the Niners on the road. And on the road against the Vikings, I worry against Brian Flores, it could be tricky. He also plays terribly in the first half, and then all his production for at least touchdowns comes in the second half. And that's a trend I don't feel like is destined to repeat every week. Like last week, it was very dicey to watch Caleb. He put up like half a point in the first half and then like 12 in the second, and he finally had a turnover, but if he has another against Minnesota, you will be kind of screwed. But he is running for over 40 yards a game on the ground. That is kind of nice to pad the stats. There's a world where Caleb does go over 25, but I think the risk is a bit too high. On the road at Minnesota, I think I'm going to pass. But he's the last player in this tier. You could tell me, just like Jameis Winston and Anthony Richardson, that starting Caleb Williams this week could be a league-winning move. It is possible, but I think I'd bet against it. This next tier, I think, is a pretty safe benching, but there's a world where I'm wrong. I'm willing to admit that I'm possibly wrong about this. They could all burn you for nothing, and maybe the two guys that you might be surprised I'm telling you to bench could actually pop off for high score. But at number 20, I have Bryce Young versus Dallas, who is a top 20 quarterback. Number 18 over the last month, averaging 16 points per game, and the matchup is top 2. So I brought this up earlier in the video. At number 20, in a 2-quarterback format, I would consider Bryce Young, but obviously not in a 1-quarterback setting. At number 21, I see a world where Will Levis does blow up. It's also a top 5 matchup for him against the Bengals, but that's the only reason why. It's the defense that sucks for the Bengals. Will Levis can still be very bad, but I think if Westbrook-Akine scores, I could see Ridley score as well. I think the game plan is going to be really, really sharp for the Titans, and maybe, just maybe, it works out, but I probably would never start him in the fantasy playoffs. No thank you with Will Levis. But my gut is telling me that the Packers-Seahawks game is going to be very low scoring and very dependent on the running backs on the goal line. I see very few touchdowns for either quarterback, kind of one max, and that's where I'm telling you to bench both Jordan Love and Geno Smith. Geno's been pretty bad lately, so it's not a surprise, but with Jordan Love, he has been the quarterback 16, and I rank him at number 22. I am downgrading him significantly on Sunday night against the Seahawks. Maybe I am wrong, but he has just not lived up to expectation, just doesn't have that ceiling. And last week he sailed a touchdown pass to Tucker Kraft, and I lost a lot of confidence when I saw that. So they do have extra rest, time to prepare, but I just think the offense is really rolling through Josh Jacobs, and I don't envision more than one touchdown for either of these quarterbacks on Sunday night. It's possible I'm wrong, but I think it'd max out at 2. And I also see the defenses both forcing a lot of turnovers in this game. So multiple turnovers for both players, in my opinion. I do not trust Love or Geno this week, but maybe you disagree. Maybe you would consider them as average, like roughly quarterback 16, 17, 18 type of guys. I am saying that is too high. At number 22, 23, I would bench Jordan Love and Geno Smith. But I would also bench Cooper Rush, who has been somewhat okay, but still not safe enough. The matchup against Carolina, I have a hard time like really buying into. They kind of shut down the Eagles for the most part last week. I think they will shut down the Cowboys as well. But this next tier, I think, is definitely a bench territory. Drake May is too risky, and the matchup is the worst on paper, but I actually believe he could be a lot better this week. If he runs for a lot of yards and doesn't turn it over, I do see some productive numbers for Drake May, but to tell you to start him would be very, very dumb. In the playoffs, it's way too risky. My gut instinct that says the Patriots could win doesn't fully mean that Drake May is a good fantasy start. So I would bench him. The matchup's way too difficult on paper. I'm also benching Russell Wilson. The matchup is also bottom 2 against the Eagles. And with no George Pickens, Russ just doesn't have that ceiling. I don't trust him against the Eagles. And then Aaron Rodgers at Jacksonville. It's a top 7 matchup, but I don't trust Rodgers at all. And then Kirk Cousins has been so bad. Both quarterbacks off an Achilles. I'm going to pass on the road, no thanks. But both get top 7 matchups. Cousins gets a top 3 matchup. Maybe I am wrong. I'm willing to be wrong, though, on these 4 players in this tier. No thank you, I'm benching them. And then these last 4, hell fucking no, but the best matchup on paper does go to Desmond Ridder against Atlanta. Maybe in a revenge spot, he runs for like 80 yards and does put up like 16 plus points. But Drew Lock versus Baltimore is himself running for almost 60 yards. the last 2 games, and maybe against Baltimore in garbage time it works out, but I don't trust him. Off the bye, I expect the Ravens defense to show up. And then Mac Jones gets an upgrade against the Jets, but not enough to trust at all. He's been the worst quarterback this season in fantasy. And then Jake Haener versus Washington, I have no idea what to expect. Filling in for Derek Carr, hell to the no with Jake Haener. But I could potentially see each of these 3 quarterbacks get on the field this week. I have Michael Penix at 33, Justin Fields at 34, and Aiden O'Connell shockingly at 35. There is a chance he does actually play in that game against Atlanta. I doubt it, but I will mention it. So that's it at quarterback. Now let's pivot to tight end, where I don't think matchups are that important, but there are a few that look like significant upgrades overall. The high-end ones are also kind of like... The fantasy gods are really laughing at this week. The best matchup, which is clearly above the rest, is Las Vegas, who get Kyle Pitts this week. But Pitts has been on a terrible run, and he's been such a liability. He almost had a bagel last week again, and I don't think you're going to trust Kyle Pitts unless you're like so effing desperate and can't find a better option on the waiver wire. But technically it is the best matchup overall. Are you willing to bet on Kyle Pitts? He's going against me this week, and if I get burned by Kyle Pitts, I'm going to be so effing mad that this Raiders matchup actually is the upgrade you need. But Cincinnati, also an upgrade for Chigokonkwo. I don't think I trust that. Miami has been an upgrade, though, and Dalton Schultz has been stepping up. I actually think Dalton Schultz is an interesting streamer option this week. But another upgrade would be Carolina for Jake Ferguson, but Ferguson has no touchdowns on the season. And even Luke Schoonmaker didn't go away entirely last week. I wouldn't trust Ferguson that much in terms of ceiling. But the Colts are a good matchup, but Troutman is irrelevant in that Broncos offense. No fucking chance. Tampa Bay is also an upgrade, but Will Dissly is unavailable. So is Hunter Henry. So Stone Smart will get the start. I don't think it's smart to start him. Chicago, also an upgrade, but TJ Hockenson has been a bit uninvolved in the red zone. Addison and Jefferson might be scoring all the touchdowns there, but it is an upgrade against the Bears. Washington, also an upgrade for Juwan Johnson, and with all those injuries, maybe Juwan Johnson could be a league winner. He was excellent last year in the fantasy playoffs. The opportunity is at least there for Juwan Johnson this week. But last upgrade would be Cleveland for Travis Kelce and Noah Gray. However, last year, Kelce was very much faded in the offense in December, and then he popped off and exploded in the playoffs. I expect at this age for that to repeat. I would be fading Kelce at the moment. I could see Noah Gray come on strong. But then these downgrades in general, I really only worry about like this little tier here, less than 7 points. That is the tough matchups, in my opinion. Everything else would be average. But the worst would be for Colby Parkinson. He already played, so no one started him. Then it's Atlanta against Brock Bowers. No one's benching Brock Bowers. Next, though, is very interesting because it's Arizona who get the Patriots this week. Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper have actually been very reliable fantasy tight ends the last month. I'll mention them in just a second, but very interesting downgrade for them. In LA, the Chargers are also a very difficult matchup for tight ends this season. Cade Otton gets a downgrade, and last week he got a big upgrade, and he only had 3 catches for 70 yards. I'd be a bit worried about Otton in this matchup. And then the Detroit and Buffalo Bills are also good at stopping tight ends, so Dalton Kincaid and Sam LaPorta on paper deserve a downgrade as well, but maybe you're willing to overlook that and just chase the shootout that we anticipate in that matchup. So those are the matchups for tight ends. But more importantly, I think, is this chart. It is the same as the quarterback chart, but for tight ends. However, with tight ends, I'm actually a bit more focused on recency bias. I think if I can find a tight end with a hot streak going, I'm a bit more inclined to trust them than maybe someone who's been a bit more reliable on the season. So what I flipped about this chart compared to the quarterback chart is they're organized over the last 4 games from highest to lowest. So whereas quarterbacks I cared more about on the season, for tight end, I'm caring a bit more on what they've done for me lately. And number 1 is Jonnu Smith. Damn, Jonnu Smith really dominating over the last month. And last week, he had a bagel going into overtime and then just torched the Jets in overtime. He was fantastic. I was joking with a friend I was facing. I was like, if I get the touchdown in overtime after a bagel this entire game, then I know Jonnu is blessed. And he's like a league winner. So I'm so happy to have Jonnu, but he's only averaging half of those last 4 game average on the season, an average of 9.2 points on the season, but that is still top 10. So at the worst, I would still be trusting Jonnu in my lineup, but we did see a bit of the risk crop up last week. There's a chance he doesn't put up double digits if he doesn't get overtime to bail you out this week. But next on the list would be Brock Bowers, who last 4 games is even better than on the season. So no one's benching Brock Bowers. And then next on the list would be Trey McBride. You're also not benching Trey McBride. That's pretty obvious. Pretty consistent numbers all year, all averaging over double digits. George Kittle has actually been a bit diminished lately, but yesterday was kind of rough. No touchdown for him. I don't think anyone was going to bench George Kittle. He got you to the playoffs. To bench him would have been stupid. But next would be David Njoku, who has been on a bit of a heater lately as they traded away Amari Cooper. That opened up a lot of targets as Jameis Winston became the quarterback. That also really worked out for him, really boosted his value. And then the last 2 games, Cedric Tillman has also had a concussion. So I could see this number diminish, but the volume has been so high for Njoku, I wouldn't be benching Njoku. He has elite upside. And then the next player would be Noah Gray, who's very touchdown dependent for these stats. There were 2 games with 4 total touchdowns, and next week one of them will go away. I would expect Noah Gray to fall down this list next week in this segment. But next on the list, another player that's been on a bit of a hot streak lately would be Mark Andrews, averaging 12 points per game. You do trust Mark Andrews. The beginning of the year when he was recovering from that car accident and Isaiah Likely was popping off, I think is the main reason why he was so bad to start the year. He has been a lot safer as of late, and off the bye, I do expect a touchdown against the Giants. That should be a blowout win for the Ravens. So definitely start Mark Andrews. But next player on the list would be Zack Ertz, who does have 3 touchdowns over the last 4 games. Ertz is a pretty reliable target for Jayden Daniels. Other than Terry McLaurin, I don't see another one. So I would be starting Zack Ertz. I do trust Ertz at the moment. And then this next player is going to shock you tremendously. As you can see, the red dot, his season-long average is way lower than the last 5 games, but he is on a heater. Austin Hooper is the best, most valuable tight end in fantasy in New England. And Hunter Henry is very reliable himself. Both players are averaging about 50 receiving yards per game, but Austin Hooper has both of the touchdowns last month. Austin Hooper is actually a very interesting pickup off of the wire if you are desperate, if you need a tight end in the playoffs. I wouldn't hate it, but the matchup against Arizona is a downgrade, as I mentioned earlier, and obviously Hunter Henry is also there. But Drake May does not really throw it to receivers. He throws it to the tight end position. Both Hooper and Henry are legit. And it's pretty shocking that Austin Hooper is ranked tied with Sam LaPorta. When you drafted Sam LaPorta, you really did not expect to be going into the fantasy playoffs with the same average expectations as a guy like Austin Hooper. If we knew that, there is no chance we would have drafted LaPorta as the tight end 1. He's been a big letdown this season, but the last few weeks, the touchdowns have been hitting, and his ceiling is massive. He could score multiple scores against Buffalo this week. So LaPorta, probably a more reliable top 10 tight end, but very, very interesting numbers on Austin Hooper. And then right behind LaPorta would be Pat Freiermuth, who's on a bit of a heater as well. With George Pickens out, the touchdown did hit last week, and Freiermuth would probably be the safest target for Russell Wilson this week. I do think Freiermuth is a good start. But next player, not that safe on the year, but has bumped it up lately, would be Juwan Johnson. Does rank right behind Freiermuth with 8.2 points the last month. A touchdown last week really helps, but Juwan Johnson is probably the number 1 receiver in that offense, given all of the injuries. It's either him or MVS, and I would probably trust Juwan a little bit more. I think Juwan Johnson is a good option as a streaming tight end this week. But this next player has been kind of the same all season. It's Tucker Kraft, and that's no surprise. Tucker Kraft is a touchdown-dependent option, but has been reliably getting you 8 fantasy points per game. Next up would be Dalton Schultz, who's also been more reliable lately, and that's nice to see. It took him a while, but now that Nico Collins is back, Dalton Schultz looks like the number 2 target for CJ Stroud. Next up, another player stepping up lately would be Luke Schoonmaker, but with Ferguson back on the field, I don't know if I trust him. Then Josh Oliver was a big problem for TJ Hockenson when he was healthy. He did come back on the field, and maybe he burns Hockenson owners one more time. But behind Josh Oliver would be Hunter Henry, who has no touchdowns and has been very consistent all season, an average of about 7.1 points all season long. Hunter Henry is a very bust-proof option, but usually does not go over 10 points. Usually gives you about 5 for 50, though. and that's usually safe for 7.5. So I do trust Hunter Henry from a floor standpoint, but Hooper has the higher ceiling. Hooper has been scoring the touchdowns in New England. But this next player has been kind of diminished lately, and this is what we expected. Travis Kelce is on a slump, and given it's December, that shouldn't shock you at all. Last year, he was terrible in December. I actually think Kelce's a bad start this week. I expect them to fade him with the division locked up, with an even bigger lead on the number 1 seed now that Buffalo lost last week. I could easily envision them not pushing it with Kelce at all. They need to save him for the playoffs. We all know that that's true. So Kelce, a bit of a risky option at the moment, only averaging 7.1 points. It's not even top 15. So Kelce, very, very risky right now. And then TJ Hockenson right behind him. No touchdowns for him either, but he has been improving. Those first couple games off of IR were a bit rough. And then the last names, I'm not going to spend too much time on. I'm just going to run through them. But Will Dissly is not available this week. He's right behind Dalton Kincaid at 6.6 points. And Kincaid has really let us down this season. I don't really trust Kincaid that much. But then behind Will Dissly, we have Evan Ingram, who's been kind of the same option as Kincaid this season, both pretty underwhelming. And then Jatavian Sanders has actually kind of stepped up, but Chigo Okonkwo, pretty touchdown dependent, followed by Cade Otton, and he's been really diminished lately, not quite the same player. After his hot streak dried up, now that Evans is back, I don't really trust Otton in a tough matchup. But then Grant Calcaterra could maybe score a touchdown. You're hoping for that. Isaiah Likely is a shoot for the moon. It's possible, but you always could get burned. And then Ferguson has no touchdowns on the season. I'm not trusting him. Komet sometimes completely gets ignored in that offense, way too risky. And then Noah Fant, everyone behind him, is far too risky. But the reason why I'm still going on this list, why it goes so deep, is because Kyle Pitts is at the bottom, averaging 2.7 points. That ranks as tight end 40 on the list the last month. So while he does average 7.1 points on the season, we're going to need a shot at redemption for Kyle Pitts to do anything this week. He gets the best matchup against the Raiders, but he's been so terrible lately. How much do you actually trust Kyle Pitts? So I think I'll pass, and that's it for the charts. Let's get into the rankings. These are the top 2 tiers on the screen here, and I think anyone in the top 6 has to be in your lineup. There's no way I'm benching Brock Bowers, George Kittle, or Trey McBride. I know Kittle didn't score a touchdown, but he still played very well against the Rams last night, and it's just how it goes. Sometimes they just don't give you the touchdown you expect. But beyond that, I think Jonnu Smith has fully earned your trust. I have him, and there's no fucking chance I'm benching him. Jonnu, I hope, leads me to victory, but I doubt he maintains tight end 1 status. That is where he ranks the last month. And David Njoku is getting 11 targets per game the last month. We know the upside is massive with Jameis Winston there. So an average of 12.4 points, the tight end 5, I wouldn't be benching David Njoku. But then at number 6, I have Mark Andrews also in that tier. I expect a touchdown for him every week, and he usually gives you about 45, 50 yards. I trust Andrews for sure. But then this next tier, there is some risk cropping up, but I do think they are the best low-end top 10 options. I would be starting Sam LaPorta. The upside is just way too high. We drafted him number 1. I know he's been disappointing, but I still expect that ceiling to crop up every now and then, and he could give you 2 touchdowns, even if it's only for 10 yards. I would still start LaPorta no matter what. I cannot bench LaPorta. If I have him, the ceiling is too valuable. And then Pat Freiermuth, I think with no George Pickens, will play very well yet again. Russell Wilson will need to trust him, so I would start Pat Freiermuth this week at tight end 8. I want him in my lineup. He's the tight end 11 over the last month. And then number 9 is Zack Ertz, the tight end 8 over the last month. But Ertz has 3 touchdowns in that span, and it could dry up. I think Ertz is still a pretty reliable option. He averages 7 targets per game, and that's why I would be starting him. The floor is pretty safe. You're not going to bust with Zack Ertz. He's not going to burn you. Maybe you don't get the touchdown, but you still probably get at least 7 points from Zack Ertz without it. And number 10, I think Tucker Kraft is obviously a liability. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he could give you 20 yards and less than three points. But I am still starting Tucker Kraft. The touchdown usually goes to him more reliably than anyone else in that passing game. At tight end, that's what we're chasing. I'm still going to rank Tucker Kraft at number 10. But at number 11, I'm very tempted to bump up Juwan Johnson at the top of this tier. I could easily see him play better this week than Sam LaPorta, Freiermuth, Ertz, or Kraft. Juwan has a path for success that is very easy to imagine. The matchup's also top 8. There's almost no other targets, but with Jake Haener, you really have no idea exactly what will happen, so that's why I can't put him above those guys. At the bottom of this tier, though, I think Juwan Johnson is a safe streaming option, my favorite guy, off of the waiver wire this week. If you can get him, if you're desperate, go ahead and plug him in. I think there is a safe floor looming for Juwan. If he finds the end zone, I don't really see anybody else vulturing him in that department. So good luck with Juwan at number 11, the last player in that tier. But then in the streaming conversation, not as safe plays in my opinion, but still kind of tempting. I do have Dalton Schultz, who I really like this week, averaging 7.9 points, has really stepped up, giving you 45 yards on 4 catches per game. That's a tight end 14 on a per game basis, and it's a top 3 matchup against Miami. So Schultz, I think, will step up, could see a touchdown for him. I think there is the ceiling open this week with Schultz, and I do like the floor as well. I don't trust Tank Dell at all. I think Schultz is that number 2 receiver in this offense. I would start him at number 12 off the wire if I could not get my hands on Juwan Johnson. Number 13, the ceiling feels kind of capped. I think there's just too many mouths to feed to expect touchdowns with TJ Hockenson, but he is a safe floor play, averaging 50 yards per game the last month. That's a tight end 19 because of no touchdowns. With 7 points per game, you're not going to get burned with Hockenson, but I don't expect him to go over 10. I don't see it happening. Even with Josh Oliver there, I also have some concerns. Those red zone targets don't really happen that often. But number 14 is Travis Kelce, followed by Noah Gray back-to-back, and I would really like to fade Travis Kelce right now. He's just ahead of TJ Hockenson, averaging 7.1 points per game, and just like him, he has no touchdowns over the last month, averaging 5 catches for only 46 yards. So Kelce has been fading, and at this point in the season, you know they're trying to save him for the playoff picture. I think they'll rely more on Noah Gray this week, and I kind of wanted to rank Gray above him, but the name value is why I couldn't. Kelce, to bench in the first place kind of feels strange, but to rank him actually below Noah Gray, I don't think I'm going to do it. I do see more of a ceiling, though, for Noah Gray. If that touchdown hits, I would expect it to go to Gray over Kelce, but in general, I see both of them not really getting that much volume and not going over 50 yards apiece. So very touchdown dependent. I don't think it hits, just a floor play for about 7 points apiece with Kelce and Gray. But then the next 2 players also in this tier, also very interesting, but the matchup is bottom 3, and maybe you're concerned about it. We have Hunter Henry and Austin Hooper at Arizona. They're both averaging 50 yards per game, and there is more volume going for Hunter Henry, 7.5 targets for him. However, Austin Hooper is still getting 4 targets, and he's catching almost every single one of them. He has a extremely high catch percentage. That's why Drake May trusts him. And with the element of surprise, he does have more touchdowns than Hunter Henry. 2 in the last month. Henry has not scored in over a month. So Austin Hooper actually has more of a ceiling than Henry, but I still trust the floor. It's higher with Henry because he has almost twice as many targets per game than Austin Hooper. So Henry's Drake May's number 1 target, and then in the red zone, May looks for Hooper. I think they're both compelling streamers, but at 16-17 with no teams on bye, you're probably going to pass. I have both Jonnu and Henry this week, and there's no chance I'm starting Hunter Henry over Jonnu Smith. That's probably a similar situation to what you have yourself. You have someone above Hunter Henry and Hooper that you're probably not going to bench. But if you're desperate, go for it. I do like them in this tier, the same tier as guys like Kelce, Hockenson, Noah Gray, and Dalton Schultz. But this next tier, I just don't think is worth it. They just haven't shown you enough this season to trust, mainly in the touchdown department. That's what we need, touchdowns to really thrive, and I think I'm going to fade them and bench them in the fantasy playoffs. Dalton Kincaid at number 18 at Detroit. I just never see him in the end zone, and we haven't seen him on the field in a while. It could be a shootout, but I just don't know exactly what I'm getting with Kincaid. And if Josh Allen steals everything, hogs it all for himself, I wouldn't be shocked at all. I'm going to bench Kincaid, but the ceiling's still there. It is possible it works out. He's also getting 7 targets per game. And then Evan Ingram also seeing 7+ targets, but no touchdowns for him as well. I don't trust the ceiling at all. It's a floor play. You're not going to get burned. But this week, we need touchdowns. We need over 10 points. And with this tier, I don't project more than 6.5. Kyle Pitts at number 20 is very very interesting because the matchup is so good, but he's been so atrociously bad lately, averaging 2.7 points, the tight end 40 in that span. I just can't trust him. I'm facing him, so he probably goes off against me and keeps me out of the next round, but to see him against me on my opponent's lineup, I do feel good. I'm not expecting a big game from Kyle Pitts. The only way it doesn't work out, though, and I'm wrong, and Kyle Pitts is actually like really good, is if Michael Penix does play and Michael Penix just locks on to Kyle Pitts. It's possible that happens, but not expecting Penix to suit up to start the game. I'm not going to expect that to happen. So bench Kyle Pitts. He's just been so bad. I can't do it. And then these next guys, I just can't start either. But Jake Ferguson and Cade Otton do have some upside. They're both averaging about 5.5 points lately, and the matchups are kind of tough. Ferguson hasn't scored a touchdown this season. I'm not going to bet on it against the Panthers. And then Otton, against the Chargers, they have not given up like a touchdown to the tight end position in like 8 weeks. It is really rare that it happens. So no thank you with him. He has been fading. And then this next tier, you're just shooting for the fence. You need touchdowns, and it's possible, but for you to actually start them feels way too risky. Isaiah Likely, Grant Calcaterra, and Cole Kmet have scored touchdowns. There is a ceiling open. They could potentially easily go over 10 points. It wouldn't shock me if it happened, but to bet on it is a little too risky. I'm going to pass in my lineup. But if you're that fucking desperate, you're probably not in the playoffs in the first place. And then these last 5, Gesicki, Sanders, Fant, Okonkwo, and Conklin, that's the bottom of the barrel. No thank you with them. And then lastly, I will mention my defensive rankings. Number 1 is clearly the Chiefs. They're going to catch a pick 6, at least one, against Jameis Winston. Then number 2, the Commanders, off a bye. Dan Quinn's defense getting Marshawn Lattimore healthy on the road against Jake Haener, a backup quarterback in the Saints. Definitely an elite play. You have to start the Commanders. But this next tier, given the garbage time potential, that's the only reason I didn't put the Ravens in the tier above, but they're definitely a great play against Drew Lock and the Giants. You have to start them off a bye as well. Number 4, the Cowboys have been stepping up on defense. Overshown got hurt, but Deron Bland is back, and Micah Parsons is very motivated to play well. So Cowboys at Carolina, that just sounds like a great start. I think the Cowboys are a high upside, high floor option, a top 5 play this week. And then the Vikings versus the Bears, Caleb Williams doesn't really turn it over, but with the home field advantage in a divisional game, I think the Vikings defense has earned your trust. I would start them this week. Number 6, I got the Jets at Jacksonville. The Jags are a matchup I will be willing to chase. I did call upset in this matchup, but still I think the Jets against Mac Jones will have some success. Sauce Gardner looks like he'll play this week. So those are the top 6. The tier break occurs, and I actually have a hard time ranking this next tier. There are 8 players in this next tier, and I could talk myself into starting any of them, really. There is a world that all works out. They're all very talented or have a very good matchup apiece. But number 7, I got the Eagles versus the Steelers with no George Pickens. I can't imagine the Steelers offense scores more than 24. But number 8, I got the Panthers versus Dallas, and the Panthers have been stepping up against Cooper Rush at home. I do think they're a top 10 play because nobody else is that like safe. I have the Seahawks and Packers back to back in the same game at 9 and 10. And I am of the belief that game is very low scoring and more of a defensive running back battle. I could be wrong. It could turn into a big shootout, and there is some risk. I understand if you think I'm wrong about this ranking, but my gut says that game is more defensive than offensive. I think the Seahawks at home get a boost with the home field, and the Packers always force turnovers. I do think they're talented enough to start in the top 10, but 11 and 12 are also very talented as well, and I'm compelled to start them regardless of the matchup. The Buccaneers do scare me a little bit, though. There's a world where Baker and Mike Evans do torch them. Bucky Irving and Rashad White could also do it as well. So that game could turn into a shootout, but the Chargers are very talented, probably keep it to a low score under 22 points as well. And then the Steelers always find a way. They're very gritty, and there will be some turnovers against the Eagles, but they could also give up like 35 points on the scoreboard and totally torch you. I have to decide between the Cowboys and Steelers this week. I think I'm going to go with the Cowboys, but I kind of want to go with the Steelers. They're the defense that got me here, and they've been the number 1 defense in my scoring this season. Steelers I can't downgrade lower than number 12 just because of all their talent and turnover potential. They could score on defense and you still get like 15 plus points from the Steelers, even on the road at Philly. But with Saquon and all those weapons, I'd rather bet against it. this week. But at number 13, I have the Broncos versus the Colts, who are also very talented, but I do envision a very good game plan from Shane Steichen. I think there is some risk here. It probably sounds strange to rank the Broncos below the Steelers against the Eagles, but the last time we saw them, they gave up over 500 yards to the Browns and that Jameis Winston offense. So their secondary has some injuries. Beyond Patrick Surtain, they can be beat, and I worry that Jonathan Taylor does torch them a little bit. So I actually really downgrade the Broncos. I did pick them to lose. If you disagree with me, then you probably think the Broncos should be top 10. I would understand ranking them above, but just like the Packers, Chargers, and Steelers, they're in this tier of very talented defenses that could burn you based on the matchup. I'm a bit concerned. Personally, you probably think I'm too low on the Broncos, but at 14, I have the Cardinals versus New England, who I think against a rookie quarterback you should probably trust to a certain degree. They're playing at home, but I have some concerns about a trap game. I did pick the Patriots to win this game, and that's why I have the Pats right below them in the tier below. But at 15 to start the Patriots feels too risky against Kyler. I'm probably going to pass. I'm also going to pass on the rest of these defenses beyond the top 16. That's the bottom half of these rankings. So no thanks with the Browns at the versus the Chiefs. I don't trust them, but maybe they do play up to the competition. It's possible. They are talented, but I'm probably going to avoid them this week. The Jaguars get the Jets, and their defense has stepped up a little bit, but the Jags defense is not a safe play in general. The Colts at Denver could really burn you. The Broncos could play very well, but I think they'll really put up a good fight. I see that as a close game. I actually think the Colts will win, but their defense not as safe as some others. The Falcons are pretty bad in general on defense, but the Raiders are a good matchup. I don't think I'm going to trust them. The Chargers are banged up on offense, so I don't think they really torch the Bucks, but the Bucks defense sucks, so I'm not going to upgrade to them higher than 20. And then outside the top 20, I'm definitely benching them. I don't trust the Raiders even against the Falcons and Cousins interceptions. No thanks with Las Vegas. And then the Dolphins at Houston, that game's a shootout, so no thanks. The Bengals at Tennessee, their defense sucks, so I think they give up a lot of points to Will Levis. And then the Niners and Rams game was much different than I thought. They should have been ranked top 10 because of the weather, and I was wrong. No touchdowns in that game. That is a bummer for me. But Texans versus Miami, not going to start them. The Titans versus the Bengals, hell no. Bears at Minnesota, hell no with them. Saints versus Washington, also fuck no. And then the Bills-Lions game, that game could be a 50-50 shootout, fuck no. And then the Giants versus Baltimore probably give up 65 points to the Ravens. So that's going to be it for this video. It went a bit longer than I would like, but still I think there's a lot of valuable information that needed to be said, and hopefully those charts really pin down some of your decisions. If not, the rankings should help. But if you still have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Here beside me are all the top 20 players at all three positions, and that's going to wrap up this video. My name is Adam Riancho. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. But I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.